listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. Do you think our listeners have figured out that we're the odd couple?
Oh, I mean, if that's not apparent, like even just looking at our pictures, that is right away apparent to me. But yes, we couldn't be, I think, more opposite, but at the same time, more compatible, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, it's exactly right. But, what really got me thinking about it today is like, okay, we've been running this podcast and you're like the perfectionist for sound quality. And I'm the guy who, if you hadn't forced me to buy a microphone, I'd still be using my AirPods for audio quality. And you made the comment about my squeaky chair and my clicking of the mouse. I just think it's so hilarious because I don't even hear those things. They just don't even register for me.
Well, I sit here and I edit all of our shows, and I'm listening with noise-canceling earphones. And, if anybody's wondering, yes, the AirPods Max, because that's how I roll. And they do a fine job of providing noise cancellation. I can hear everything, right? And now we're on this new platform that definitely ups the quality. So it becomes even more important to try and deviate, or not deviate, but to eliminate extraneous noise. So yes, I sometimes will make comments about Jim's squeaky chair behind the scenes as you hear him shifting around in his seat sometimes as he's talking. I will tell you, I have been guilty the last couple of episodes of an issue that has been driving me absolutely crazy. And I finally figured out over the weekend what was causing it. If you go back and listen to the last two episodes, there was like this very, very slight static crackle when I was talking, but it wouldn't happen all the time. It was like pulsing, like every 1 or 2 seconds, you might hear it. And the only way you would hear it would be if you were listening with something like noise canceling earphones or something like that. And what I did is I figured out over the weekend, I was like, okay, what the heck is going on here, right? Is it the new cable I've got? Is it the microphone? Is it my Rodecaster Pro that I'm using, for a mixer? Was it, the platform itself, et cetera? And it turns out I have a Razer Blade 15 as one of my main kind of editing machines and other things. And I had the power brick too close to the cable. And so I was getting interference from the power brick into the cable, and it was just ever so slightly you could hear it, but it was driving me absolutely crazy, and I'm glad I got it fixed. So hopefully, I don't hear it right now. Hopefully you guys aren't hearing it out there in the real world, but I try my best to try and put out a good, clean audio product for everyone.
Well, I hope our regular listeners appreciate it, and hopefully my clicking doesn't drive them too crazy, but if it does, feel free to comment, and I don't know what I'll do.
We're going to peer pressure Jim into getting like a mic boom arm. I think maybe the next upgrade for you would be going from a condenser mic to a dynamic mic. I did it. I'm way pleased. I have a Shure MV7 now, and this thing is awesome. Like, I feel like even my terrible voice sounds, pretty decent through it. And then, once it goes through processing and stuff like that, you'll be probably surprised to meet me in real life. I have like totally different voice maybe from what you hear on the podcast, but yes,
well,
definitely.
Jeff, I'm thinking about the WD-40 investment. That should be under $5, so at least you got that.
Yeah, we did ask Osh for that this morning for, I think he said like $279 for a can of WD-40 for your chair. So maybe our business overlords will help us out with that. So should we talk some identity?
Let's do this thing.
All right. Well, let's get into today's main topic, which is modern IGA's role in zero trust. That is a completely loaded term, but covers a lot of ground. And I'm very excited that we have Rod Simmons. He's the Vice President of Product Strategy at Omada. He's also a fellow podcaster extraordinaire. He has his own podcast, the SMR podcast, which I listened to over the weekend for the first time and absolutely loved. If you like technology, and that is right up my alley, I had a good old time listening to that. So welcome to the show, Rod.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. It's nice listening to you guys, and I'm laughing because I have a friend who's a podcaster, and she is adamant on audio quality. Like, if we have a bad show with bad audio, she'll like send a text and say, I stopped listening 5 minutes into your show because I could not tolerate the audio quality. And it is true. Either you really care or you're like Jim and you're just like, it doesn't really bother me. I can listen to anything. You could rattle a chain next to Jim and he's probably fine with it because as long as he can hear what he wants to hear. So totally with you guys, with you, probably Jeff on the trying to optimize the audio quality.
Well, truth be told, I never listen to our own show because I can't listen to my own voice. It's like, it's just a pet peeve or something.
I will say, I usually, if I listen to our show in post, I'm like, God, I sound so nasally. There's always something. There's something about your voice that you just don't want to hear, or you're like, I live the show. I don't need to re-listen to it. But I think Jeff, it's hard. You don't listen to the entire thing, but you're going through bits and pieces, and you're trying to listen for those bad sounds. And if you hear something repetitive, you almost have to comb through the entire show to try to fix those things. So I totally get it.
Yeah, it is. It's funny when I hate listening to my own voice too, and I think it's a universal thing. I don't think anybody likes listening to their own voice, even people who, by any substantive means, right? That person has a radio voice. Even they probably hate their own voice, right? So I definitely, when we're going through editing, I do all the editing for the show too. So I'm listening usually to, I was there for the episode, and then I'm there for at least one or two playthroughs as I'm scrolling through looking for issues with it and so forth. And at this point, I can recognize waveforms of Jim clicking his mouse, for example. Like, I can see it. I know what's happening. I don't have to hear it. Like, that's just where I'm at right now. I'm like Neo in the Matrix. The letters are dropping, the waveforms are there, and I'm able to say, okay, here is, Jim's squeaky chair. I'm going to pick on Jim a lot today. Here's Jim's squeaky chair. Here's his clicky mouse, all that stuff. And it's interesting to see also hear the cadence with the way people talk. Like, I have a certain speaking style, and I might pause and then get into something. Other people kind of run right through. Others use a lot of filler words, ahs. I think we're all kind of guilty of that to some degree, and I think that's one of the things I think that makes this so interesting is just its conversational nature. This is the way real people talk. I don't go through and edit out and try to make everyone sound perfect and professional because that's not realistic. So yeah, I empathize and understand with your friend who does the podcasting, and I would just give, I'll raise the fist and say, sister, I'm with you. So we've got you here. Let's talk about modern IGA, and we'll get into that. We'll talk about Zero Trust. We'll get into that as well. But being the first time on the show with us, I'd love to hear, how did you get into the identity space itself? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Yeah, I say that it started off with a side choice. Like, I chose to go to a small software vendor, actually to get into 80 migrations years ago. It was probably in 1999, a company called Fastlane Technologies. And we got acquired by a significantly larger company called Quest Software. So that kind of brought me into like the opening fringes of identity, because your portfolio expanded. You were starting to do more with the products. And I left there and then went mainly focused heavy on security to a small software company called NetPro, and we got acquired again by Quest. So I landed back at Quest, and the company had grown bigger and was heavily in identity space, heavily in privileged access management space. So I was able to cut my teeth a lot through there. So I would say acquisition is really what got me into it. But I had a really good passion for security, and it's a very interesting space, and identity is a massively interesting space. And then my career, really from that point on, has just really focused within the identity space, whether it's privileged identity or identity security or like threat protection or advanced threat protection. Anything that circled around identity and identity security has always been an interest to me since probably 2008. So, but I'd say acquisition or multi-acquisitions is really what got me started within the identity space.
So, Rod, you're with Omada.
Correct.
Which is an IAM or IGA vendor. How do you explain to people who don't know what that is what you do? What do you tell them IGA is?
Yeah, so it's always a hard one because if you're at a customer, even if they don't get identity governance or they don't really understand it, it's a very easy conversation to have because they have a good or bad background. But when I'm talking to, let's say, a friend who has nothing to do with technology, they're like, all right, I know that you say that you're a VP of product strategy at Omada, but what does Omada do? Like, explain to me exactly what they do. To try to walk someone through that conversation, I always have to relate it back to things that are natural for them in their everyday. And I say, well, at one point in time, hopefully you didn't, but you got this CD in the mail and you created an AOL account and you logged on online, and that's how you got online. And you had a shared secret with you and AOL. It's like you had an email address, password, you got in, and everything worked for you. Great. I was like, but as we've gone more into modern times, now you have a Facebook account, right? You log into Facebook, and you might go to another website and want to leave a comment, and you can use your Facebook identity to leave that comment. I was like, so identity is one part, like that. What we deal with is really who you are, and then where it allows you to gain access. And the challenge that many people deal with, which really hits home with them, I said, have you ever hired an employee? Yeah. Have they ever got in and you realize IT didn't order their computer, someone didn't create their accounts, so for 4 or 5 days they sit there and they can't work? Yes. I make sure that doesn't happen. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I get what you do. So, and when you bring it all together from something as simple as that you can use, let's say your a login to go anywhere you want to go within an organization or within things that you accept. Because they recognize that when I use my Facebook ID here, I get that prompt saying, are you trying to use this? Are you okay with this? Are you willing to share this? You're doing that authorization that typically IAM does in the background, so they can identify with that. But then more importantly, I think, which is the other side, is we've all had that where you start a new job and you're like, I mean, you guys have known for weeks. Like, I've been talking to you for months. How do I get here? And there's no computer. Or I have a computer, but I don't have an account. I can't get to this. And for the first 6 months at a job, you're always saying, I didn't know I was just have access to that. I have to now request that, and waiting for it to all get fulfilled. And you're saying companies don't realize the fundamental cost that's associated with it, but most employees have had that experience. So once you start explaining them down that way, they fully open up and say, oh my gosh, I totally get what you're talking about now.
Yeah, my latest explanation is, have you heard of ransomware? Do you get asked about ransomware a lot? I mean, I've got to imagine that's first and foremost on the minds of almost every client that you work with.
Yeah, and so it's funny when you guys being in the same industry, often you don't want to tell people exactly what you do, and it's because they just don't get it. So they'll say, what do you do? You're like, I work with computers. Oh, can you fix my computer? So you're like, okay, wait, I need to specialize this a little bit more. And you need to pull them down that pathway of, all right, well, I work in this very specific segment. But yeah, we do hear a lot about ransomware, and often anything to do with like a phishing attack or anything like that. For many organizations, when we talk to them, it's someone had too much access. That too much access got us in a world of problems, and we can never let that happen again. So they're trying to put process around that. Or it's the other way, which is if you're US based or even if you're international, we got a big government contract or a big contract with said vendor, and that vendor now requires that we go through all these processes because they need to secure their entire supply chain, and we're now part of it. So, and what they're really saying is, if you don't do proper governance, ensuring that only the right people have access to the right stuff in your environment, which may impact us, then you can't do business with us. And that changes an organization overnight to, we don't really care about it, and we run like the Wild West, to all of a sudden it's mission critical if we want to maintain this multi-million or billion-dollar contract with the U.S. federal government, for example.
I bet everybody who's a chief information officer or chief information security officer, when they visit their grandparents, they bring them over to the computer. It's blue screen of death. Can you fix this? And when they can't fix it, it's like,
you're never good at your job.
Not very smart. You're not very good at what you do.
It's true. I got, like I say, I used to just say I work with computers, and I realized it really was the worst thing, because you didn't just have to fix their Windows machines, but if they happen to have a Mac, you're fixing that. They happen to have an iPhone, you're fixing that, a tablet, and the list of things that was the expectation that you could fix, because for some reason they just felt that computers were very small. And I still get friends calling me saying, I'm having Wi-Fi problems. What should I go with? And you're like, the mesh network, leave me alone. So I think we've all been there, and it's just because you're the tech friend, and anything within that realm. And 90% of the time, we all have to admit the problems that our non-technical friends have, we already know how to solve them. It's just, I just don't want to do it.
you don't want to get down to that rabbit hole. And, I think you bring up something interesting. Is I think 20 years ago when you said you were in IT, that probably was like that was enough. But now I think IT has gotten so big that I think people who aren't really in IT kind of are starting to understand that, oh, it isn't just, fix my printer or why can't I get on the Wi-Fi or any of that other stuff.
Yeah, it was so it's funny. I've done a ton of public speaking, and I remember it was probably around 2003, 2005, somewhere around there. I just by list, had people raise their hand. Anybody who's ever been involved, because that's when we started really hearing about security breaches that really felt like they impacted us versus organizations. How many people have got a notice from any institution that your data was compromised? 1 or 2 people raised their hand. Fast forward, when I asked this around 2011, 2012, 50% of the room raised their hand. Fast forward, when I asked this, it was around 2018, 2019. I don't think there was a single person who hadn't raised their hand saying, at some point in time, my data's been compromised. And often, which is for most people is the frustrating, is it's not due to my fault. Like, if you think about how many breaches, like if you were a government contractor and you lost your data, it wasn't I lost it. It was I was part of the UPS breach. So my data was lost. It wasn't something I did personally wrong. It was something wrong that happened because they attacked a particular organization. Or if you're part of the Anthem breach, it's just my company chose them as a healthcare provider, so my data was lost there. Or I got lost via a hotel chain breach where it's like I'm just a loyal customer to that hotel chain. I will never stay anywhere else, and they were compromised. So it doesn't matter what facet of business you go to, and I often. Every once in a while, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that from a security perspective. But sometimes it's just like, that's a hard one to avoid. Like when you really get down to how they were compromised, often we kind of look and say, or I should say, some people look and say, that would have never happened to us. We fixed that last week, didn't we? And because people, they realize that many organizations realize they're almost as vulnerable as the person who just got compromised. The only difference was, we learned what happened to you and we fixed it right after we heard about what happened to you. So that's it's a crazy world that we're dealing with. But seeing how it's matured over the last 20 years it's insane.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of those issues that we've seen come out result of shared passwords. I think we saw the most recently, at least that I'm aware of, was Colonial Pipeline. Right, one VPN reused password that was part of a breach somewhere else, and that's how they got in and caused all that damage. And a lot of times we also see manual kind of processes contributing to human errors and things like that. And I know that's something that Jim and I kind of deal with on a daily basis, is working with organizations that are having, paper and fax, and just really inefficient manual processes to work through different identity lifecycle type events. When you walk into an organization and you see that, where do you usually have them start? Is it, let's start by working with onboarding or offboarding or access reviews, or let's just figure out who has access to what? Like, what's your game plan going in?
Yeah, so I mean, like with anything else, which I'm sure you guys get into, the first part is discovery. I think if you walk into an organization and it's very rare you walk into an organization that have nothing. They usually have some process, homegrown, manual, scripts, whatever it might be, but they do understand how it's supposed to work. And that's great. Like I say, if you've written scripts and you're saying, we want a product, okay, the scripts are causing you a pain. What pain is it causing? John left. He's the only one who wrote the scripts, and no one knows how to make this go. And we can't really change this process ever again. So that's the problem. Or it's just become cumbersome, like troubleshooting through this. And what I think most companies realize at some point in time is, it doesn't matter. I know that your audience can't see it, but I'm holding up to you guys a tape measure, Husky. Let's say that Husky was a company. Like, we make tape measures. We make tools. We don't want to write software code to manage an identity management process. And they quickly realized that, yes, I could hire 5,000 developers to maintain this process, or I can hire a company that specializes this and put those people to use making better tools is to keep Rod buying the next tape measure we're going to do, or the next measuring tool, or the next tool we're going to deliver, the next desk, whatever it is. When companies transition, they realize that either from a cost perspective, we no longer want to manage this process. And then the next real leap on that is, at the rate we're adopting new solutions, like at one point in time, what we did worked really well. It was all in-house, all direct database access. Everything worked well. But now all of our customers are coming to us with cloud hosted solutions. So we're essentially going to have to rewrite almost 90% of our platform with this whole transition to cloud computing. We don't want to do it again. So they come in and they say, we want someone who can go standardized based approach, less code for us to maintain, higher efficiency, and going that route. So typically you start with, let's get your data into a platform, and now let's clean your data. Because as many customers of you we've walked into and they say, we have great clean data. You walk in and you're like, oh my gosh, like you told me you had like 50 different job titles or 100 job titles, and we're like seeing 197 because you have so many misspellings in job titles. Or you don't, tons of people don't have managers. So where do their approvals actually go to now, and how do you figure that out? So it's trying to pull all that stuff together so that they have like a cohesive story, and then we can get it out to where it needs to go, because it's often what you don't know which is really hurting organizations. And I think if you've been doing it manually, there's a couple people who know a lot of things. And then there's, I'd say, I hate the term shadow IT, but there's a lot of people who know everything you don't know and don't want to tell you because they don't want you messing with their world. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of...
They don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah. I'm dealing with a customer now, and they're leveraging an application. It absolutely came in through shadow IT. The vendor did not implement SCIM properly. So the IGA guys are saying, we want to take over and manage it, but it's a horrible implementation of SCIM. They didn't follow any of the standards. And it's trying to get the vendor to do the right thing to implement SCIM properly on top of it so they can properly govern and manage it moving forward. And that's the challenge that organizations deal with, is that, if you walk in, and I'm sure you guys have seen it probably in your job, where you walk in and you say, the IT group has this budget, and then you find out that there's some business unit that has tenfold the budget because all the money comes in. So they're like, we go to IT and say, we need a new database. IT says, no. They're like, go pay for a database, get us what we need to keep going. Like, you're not going to get in my way of this line of revenue. And from an outside standpoint or an attacker standpoint, it's the perfect formula, because you know that businesses do this, that's how they operate, and hey, it just works. And sorry, I wanted to touch back on something you mentioned earlier about passwords. While it is a small part of what we do, do you guys see the same problem where you go into an organization and you start trying to talk to them about federation, and it feels like the conversation sort of dies because of the type of applications they've deployed? They either don't support federated authentication, so they can't, and they're trying to figure out password synchronization across systems, and you want to slap your forehead?
Password synchronization sucks. Don't do it.
But it's a great transition for my next question, which
awesome.
is, I do want to bring up the whole piece. You guys just released a report or collaborated on a report titled "A Modern Approach to Identity Governance and Administration," and talking about the differences between modern IGA and legacy IGA.
Yep.
And so I think that's a lot what you're getting at, right? When you talk about that password piece, that's not modern. That's Stone Age when it comes to IT. But, specific to this report, you talk about legacy IGA versus modern IGA. I wondered if you could explain what the difference between the two is.
Yeah, sure. So, and it's probably easier just to explain what modern IGA is. And this isn't like a term that Omada has coined. This is more like Gartner kind of really laid out like some of the tenets of what they feel a modern IGA solution is. And the first part is going to be something that's, cloud native, cloud architected type solution, obviously enterprise scale. If you're in IGA space, obviously you want something that's very full featured, short time to value, short time to deployment. So you don't want customers dealing with what they've dealt with in a legacy environment, all the different standards that you're trying to adhere to, your governance requirements, the IGA solution. But the most important is that it's built upon open standards, it's a service-driven architecture, and it's heavily standards-based. So if I could go back like a long time ago from a IGA standpoint, you go back 10 years, one of the biggest challenges is that IGA is a very complex problem to solve. And it touches so much of your organization, and it can require customization. And the more you bolt on and customize and do these things, when the vendor comes back and says, time to upgrade, it's like, how do we unwind this so we can upgrade and make it clean? And that's always historically been a problem for customers with managing and upgrading anything that's designed to touch 99% of your organization or 80% of your organization, and it has heavy customization and code from somebody else added in, it becomes hard. And with modern IGA, you're essentially trying to say, let's move away from heavy code base. So let's go to with configuration. So it's inherently just built into the product. So upgrades are just like click a button, go get a cup of coffee, and you're back. And it also mainly takes the burden off. So I think at one point in time, we all thought moving to the cloud was going to be, I'll say, less expensive per se. And I think what most organizations realize is that transition over to the cloud was really about removing the burden upon your organization of the things you didn't want to do anyway. So I don't really want to manage backups. I think, like, to me, there's nothing more of a snooze fest than talking about someone with a backup strategy and RPO and RTO. Like, that to me is just like, I'm not interested. But there are people who are really good at it, and let them manage it. And I think that's the part of the infrastructure you slowly just start to turn those pieces over. And a modern solution allows you to focus on what the product is supposed to be delivering to you and the value that it's supposed to be delivering, and not on essentially what it takes to make the sausage. So we essentially say, here, enjoy this delicacy that sits on this layer, but you don't have to worry about backups, SLA type strategies, the security model. We've got all that covered for you. And all you have to focus on is, how do I integrate this with my business and keep my business running and make it efficient?
Yeah, who's going to have a bigger security budget, right? A company that focuses on that as their core business, or vendor, the company that builds toys, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't let you go down market. I mean, if you think about it, if every customer has almost a fixed lift to get in, which is you have to deploy infrastructure, you have to deploy database servers, just Windows servers or Linux servers, and all this that you need to maintain. When you start to go to an organization who has real governance requirements, because they're saying, we're a 500 user shop, but we still have governance requirements because of the customers we work with. What's the solution for us? So allowing that to move to the cloud, it says you don't have to maintain that part. That's just part of a one user license cost that you deal with. So it really just makes it a lot easier. And even as the organizations get bigger, while you might have people who practice, no one wants to say, man, I can't wait to give up a weekend for an upgrade. I want to say, we're going to do an upgrade. I'm going to hit the upgrade button on my way home. If it goes awry, I will call the vendor when I get home and say, upgrade had an issue, or the upgrade just magically is delivered to me. But it's not my problem to fix. It's the vendor's problem who's delivering this to me as a service. And I'm not paying overtime for like 8 guys to be on the weekend or to strategize, manage an upgrade process. Because probably the other thing that we all realize in our careers is there's nothing more frustrating than getting hit by a security vulnerability that the vendor told us about 6 months ago, and that we're still in testing to see if we can roll in production. Like, it's what drives most IT professionals crazy, saying we got to get from being notified to implementation a lot faster. And often it's like there are capabilities that a vendor delivers that you're like, your vendor already has that. Oh, when they release it 2 years ago, you still haven't approved those features, let alone the last 2 years worth of features they implemented. So they can give you what you want. You just got to upgrade, guys.
Yeah, I think even bigger than features is security patches.
Yeah, they're the hard ones.
And to get those, yeah, they're the hard ones. And I think organizations, I mean, you see it over and over again with like the vulnerabilities that happened in Exchange Server, and you see how long they took the total population or industry to roll those changes. It's not something that's acceptable anymore.
Well, even then, right, it was known, and companies still didn't do anything about it. And I guess the U.S. government went and got a court order that let them basically hack into everybody who was not, patched up, and the government went and patched it for you, whether you wanted it or not, to try and prevent more.
It's probably the one time where you will have more organizations adopting like 365, anything else, saying, there was a point in time where I was probably on the side of, put my mail on someone else's platform? Are you crazy? Now it's like, whatever. You can have email. Hey, my docs, I don't need a file server. Just give me OneDrive and SharePoint and or Google Drive, whatever it is. throw that stuff up there. I don't want to manage that part of my business anymore. It's not. It's just. I mean, you have people who were exchange administrators thought I'm going to be out of a job, and it's like, nope, you're now a 365 administrator. Your purview's gone a little wider. You're just not managing the boring parts anymore. You're managing a broader reaching piece of the business. So it's a good transition.
One of the areas that that report also touched on, and we'll have a link to this in our show notes so people can kind of check it out, is the role of IGA when it comes to zero trust. And I'm curious to see what your thoughts on were that, because I'm going to kind of combine questions here, right? Is what is the role? And then one of the stats that was in that report was 81% saw IGA as a key element of their zero trust strategy, but we still see a lot of organizations that really just aren't great at IGA. They're still doing things manually, or they're using outdated software processes, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about what you took from that report as far as where does IGA fit into zero trust? And then any thoughts on why the capability set within an organization just hasn't kept up with times?
Yeah, so you guys did a podcast actually not too long ago, and I think that one of the key topics was zero trust. And the person on that podcast, I don't remember the name, said it perfect. It's all about identity. And if your security strategy doesn't start with identity, you're doing something tremendously wrong, and you need to start all over again. Because if you step back for a moment, and I do know your audience ranges like from, you might have experts and you might have novice, but when you step back and you say, what are you trying to do? Well, I want to ensure that only the right people. Oh, stop. You said people. So if you're trying to make sure you want to make sure that I can get access to this, or more importantly, only I can get access to this and other people can't. You started with identity, and that was the core of it. But as you start to think about zero trust and you expand that out a little bit more, zero trust deals a lot with policy, and so does governance and IGA. So if you start thinking at some point in time, do you need access certification or recertification of your zero trust policies? At some point in time, you might say, maybe we do want to roll that into our overall governance strategy, where someone is going to go back in and say that policy should still be the way it is. It's a permissive policy, for example, saying that under these conditions from a trusted device, you can get access to this. Maybe that's too permissive and you want to tighten that down. But if you don't do a regular review of those policies are going to grow unchecked. So you want to put governance and controls around that. So I think IGA fits really well with that. But at the core of it, it's making sure that you have a really good understanding of what are all your identities. Because one of the key things is in zero trust, I can say you become such a high risk, untrusted user. Maybe I want to lock you out. Do I just want to lock you out? Or do I want to lock out all 15 permutated versions of you that are in my organization? Meaning, I don't just want to lock out Rod's AD account, but I want to lock out his AD account, Salesforce account, and then the list goes on. I want to lock him out as a full identity across our infrastructure while we try to IT figures out what's going on, and then we can reallow him back. So I think we fit into that model pretty well to help out with zero trust in that. As it relates to the report had some really amazing findings inside of it. What we're seeing, and I think this aligns with you actually on one of your most recent podcasts, you guys talked about the IDSA. I heard it. I was like, oh my gosh, someone knows about it. But the Identity Defined Security Alliance, we're actually a member of it. They have a new report that I guess at the airing of this just recently released. And some of their findings are perfectly in line with everything I'm saying and everything you probably would see in our report, which is organizations are sort of recognizing that IGA or identity projects, IAM IGA is no longer about like automation and efficiency. It's all about security. And I think anybody who's been in IGA or IAM for a long time has been saying, that's what we've been saying for years. It's all about security. But I think the industry is starting to recognize that, and you're starting to see it for where the rubber hits the road in organizations. They're starting to recognize that transition from we've automated our business process to we're securing our business process, and it all ties into our overall security strategy and not just an efficiency strategy.
When you see organizations paying upwards of $40 million of ransom, security takes more of a lead, right? I mean, I remember when I first got into the industry, every time you talked about security, it was like you were trying to sell FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I don't think it's viewed that way as much anymore. But one thing I picked up from the report, it focused a lot on preventing compromised accounts using IGA. And so the question to you would be, could you summarize how IGA can help with preventing compromised accounts?
I think the first problem you run into is if with many organizations, when you go through that discovery phase, they realize they have more. I'll call them orphaned accounts. It's probably the easiest way to identify those, which is no one really knows what that's for. And when I've done with AD, I could go through someone's AD, we identify all these accounts, and then there's a bunch of accounts where someone's like, I don't know, no one knows what it is. It's like, all right, great, we do some more analysis. Like, password hasn't changed in about a decade. Like, anybody know now? Nope, no one knows. And the fear is, but if we disable it and it breaks something critical to the business, no one wants to touch it. So IGA is about trying to get all of that stuff collected and then put it, like, I'll say all these accounts will have an owner. And when Rod leaves the organization, someone else will become the owner. And it's very descriptive, all those things. So we can tie either human identities to human, automated identities to automation processes, robot identities to robot processes. It's really just coalescing all of that so that you really understand what it is you're dealing with and cleaning up that orphan stuff. Because where most organizations get dinged, it's those orphaned accounts that no one's touched for 20 years. They're left active. They're way over permissioned, and now you're sort of dealing with problems. So from a security perspective, or where IGA is really helping out, it's identifying what it is you have, identifying those things that are orphaned, trying to put ownership, clean up around those, and then most importantly, knowing that when a person comes in the organization, as their identities that they might have or accounts they have with the organization expand and contract, that when they leave, they're all gone or disabled or whatever your business process, but they're not orphaned and left unlocked where someone can come back through. Because, I mean, we've all heard the story of someone saying, I left my company 6 months ago and I still have VPN access and I can still get access stuff. Like, they call me for help and I VPN in, go do the work, and then tell the guys to go look it up. It's done for them. And no one asks, how was I able to do that? It's like, because your processes are broken. So that's where IGA really does fit in.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the orphans because, I think one thing, so for people who aren't clear on what an orphan is, these are accounts in your environment that you haven't established ownership over, right? These are doors that get into some system and you don't know that they belong to Rod or Jeff or Jim or whoever they are. And this reminds me of a story way back. This would have been, a long time ago. I'll try to protect the guilty. We were rolling out an IGA product, and I remember working with my friend Wayne, working through the deployment of that. And one of the systems that we were deploying to was a system that had, at the time, this would have been early 2000s, over 1 million accounts were in this system. And we ran an exercise to say, okay, well, how many can these match up with an identity record and start to identify the orphans? And it came back with, I want to say something like 90,000 accounts that we had no idea who they belonged to. And I remember turning to Wayne and say, oh, that's not that bad. Because I think we thought it was going to be a lot worse. Like, we were thinking like, okay, we're probably looking at like 200, 300,000 accounts. We really don't know who these people are, whatever it may be. And I remember he looked at me just kind of incredulously. He was like, and that's something that's stuck with us over the years is, remember the time we found 90,000 accounts that were orphans and you thought it wasn't a big deal? And it was like, well, yeah, but because I thought it was going to be more like 200,000 or 300,000. But those are all potential avenues, right, into a system or into an organization where if you don't know who has access to what, you really need to start figuring that out and making sure that you start to button up your processes so that if those types of accounts start to appear in your environment, they can be an indicator of a compromise. How do you make sure that you tackle those, right? And I think if you've got a mature identity governance process and solution, is you have a process where there is only one way to get an account on this specific system. And if it doesn't go through that process, it immediately gets flagged and highlighted so that we can kind of head off potential, impacts. And maybe it's even automatic, remediation for whatever that looks like. We know that AD accounts only get created this one way. And if it doesn't go through this way, automatically shut it down. So I think there's a lot of value there. And that certainly, maps back to that, who has access to what and being able to track that.
Yeah, I think you hit it right. It's one method of getting an account here. And for some customers, they do want exactly what you described, which is when you don't follow the process, the account goes away and we force you through the process. For others, they're like, we can reconcile. We can go through a reconciliation process so that we can continue forward. So the manager will say, yep, they should have access. We accept that. deviation, and we flow it in, and then we slap the person's hand who did it outside of the normal process to get them back into process. But yeah, absolutely.
That process to me, Rod, is a little scary because if I'm a hacker and I get in and I'm using some, Mimikatz or something like that to quote unquote barely get access, what am I going to do with that access? I'm going to create administrative accounts on every system I can, and I'm going to make them look like real accounts. And that way, when you go ahead and shut down the access I use, I can still get in. And so, to me, that's one of the biggest things IGA can do. It's like, hey, we found these accounts that we had no part in provisioning or going through the approval. So, when I think about ransomware or an organization being breached by like a ransomware gang, I think that's one of the biggest things IGA can do. And we're running out of time. We could sit here and talk all day, but I did want to ask you one more thing about the report, which is talked about using cloud-based delivery model of IGA to achieve benefits at a lower TCO. I kind of wanted to get some of your thoughts on what is the case that the modern IGA solution can provide to achieve the lower TCO.
Yeah, I think I touched on some of those earlier, and I know this is running out of time. I won't go too deep into them, but one of the places for most people is upgrades. You're not scheduling upgrades. You're not doing that anymore. You click a button, walk away, and in some cases, it might be automatically delivered to your platform. So you wake up one day and it's like, oh, we have new features or new security capabilities. The other places that you're not doing the things you don't want to do or that are costing your organizations. You're not managing backups, not managing uptime, because on a cloud platform, I can give you 5 nines of uptime availability, and try to do that on premise it's a bit more costly than most organizations want to manage. So it gets you past the things that you want to do, and I think that's the key. So you get those extreme values because one vendor, like even if you look at Azure, it's the reason why Microsoft can deliver stuff to you at a better overall cost from end to end, is because they're doing it not just for you, but for 500 or 500,000 or 10 million customers. And it's the same thing with governance in the cloud. We're able to deliver a solution to thousands of customers and make it very easy for them to adopt. And the stuff that they shouldn't have to do is the cost is spread across many customers, and it's more efficient.
Yeah, and plus that cost too, if you're going to the cloud, is typically on a subscription model. So you're spreading out the cost of, rather than having like a big bang up front with a sticker price that it may be shocking for some folks.
Yeah, that's one value of subscription. It's a transition because for much of my career, we sold perpetual type licenses, and for sales reps, they love that. But subscription, it's a different model, but it works out really well for customers in the long haul.
Yeah, so you've been, I think this is all good comments, and like Jim said, we can talk pretty much all day around IGA specifically as part of IAM, but why don't we go ahead and close it out here? But I think before we go, let's end it on a little bit of a lighter note, and I want to pick your brain, Rod, and Jim as well. So I think people know I'm an electric vehicle aficionado. I have a Tesla Model 3 myself, but I see a lot of exciting kind of other electric vehicles that are coming out in the near term. Things like Ford has I don't know if it's inappropriately named, the Mustang Mach-E. There's the Cybertruck from Tesla. Ford just also had the F-150 announcement. Volvo has like the Polestar brand. Rod, I guess from your perspective, is there an electric vehicle that excites you or something that you're really looking forward to?
Yeah, so I'm in the same camp as you. I have a Tesla. I have a Model X. My wife drives a 3. Unfortunately, Tesla just canceled the Plaid Plus. So I was really.
But it's supposed to be just almost as good. I mean, 2 seconds, 0 to 60.
Well, it was the range that I liked. I liked the 520 plus mile because I have a 500-mile road trip to our beach house we have, and I was like 500 miles. It's like I'll go well over halfway, charge, and then pull right in, and I'll have one stop. But that was most interesting. But honestly, if you haven't looked at their Mercedes EQS, oh my gosh, like that vehicle and what they've done, that has me drooling. I'll also say the Rivian, was it the truck, the R1T? R1T is the one that I like a lot. So my buddy is in love with the F-150 Lightning. I think it looks good, and I think what they did with the front trunk is insane. So I'm just excited that more people will start driving EVs. I've been doing it since 2017 now. 2016, 2017, and I love it. I'll never go back to a regular vehicle. Is Jim a electric vehicle driver yet?
I'm not one yet, not yet, but the Harley Livewire
Oh yeah,
looks really cool to me. Yeah, but 30,000 for a motorcycle might be outside of my budget, so I'm still saving up for that Canon WD-40.
and you definitely don't want to see probably the price of the EQS, because that is going to be brutal.
The EQS is definitely that is like next gen right there, just the way it looks. And there's a lot of vehicles that are coming out. Lucid has one,
Yeah.
The Grand Touring and the Air. And I'm curious to see what actually makes it into production, because I think once it hits a certain price point and it actually is realistic for people, and we get a charging network out there, I think Tesla owners are relatively spoiled with the supercharger network. It's fantastic for road trips. They're strategically located and it just works. 7-Eleven just recently announced a partnership with, I don't remember which company, but they're going to start putting electric vehicle chargers at 7-Elevens.
Oh wow!
So if I'm a gas station owner, I think one of the things that I'd be looking for is, okay, where do I put an electric charger in my lot somewhere? Because especially right now, people who have electric vehicles tend to have a little bit of a higher income, and so they need places to spend their money. So places like shops, restaurants, stuff like that just makes total sense to put that infrastructure in.
Restaurant owners should have electric chargers, because I think if you've done any road trip, meaning where you had to charge for a little bit, you likely stop, plug in a charge, go in, sit down, have a meal like a normal person, and then come back out and go. And if you know that you can get a new patron in the door for 20 to 40 minutes, it's perfect.
Imagine Sonic doing it. They already run so many TV ads. They could get the word out quickly, and people just park in those
Did you say Sonic?
Sonic,
yeah.
I was thinking Mastro's, like nice steakhouse. Go sit down, enjoy for a while. But Sonic will work too.
Jim just wants to see, I think, probably a commercial with those two dorky guys. I don't know if they still do the commercials for Sonic or not, but I'm sure they'll work in some clever pun with, electric lemonade while you charge or something like that.
Yeah, right.
All right, well, I know we're running out of time, but before we go, Rod, any kind of final words of wisdom that you want to throw out there for us and the listening audience around IGA and modern and zero trust or electric vehicles?
I'll stick with IGA, and I'll say, if you don't have a good program in place at your organization, I'd say it's at least time to look and understand what you can get there. And I would look at something that is a cloud delivered solution, and probably ignore any challenges you've had in the past with kind of the legacy on-prem type solutions, and take a look at what is available now around governance, and check out what Gartner and Forrester and Kuppinger have to say about the space and the direction it's going, because I think they'll guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, that's good advice. There's a lot of good products in that space, including Omada, right? Where you can modernize your infrastructure from an IGA perspective, and it is so much easier. Jim, how about yourself?
I guess since we talked a lot about breaches and preventing breaches and ransomware, my tip number one always is MFA everywhere. But number two is probably IGA. Having a good IGA infrastructure, controlling administration of identities, but also having that governance component that's out there, discovering new accounts that shouldn't be. I think that's an early indicator of, some nefarious activity that's happening on your network. So it's a very important investment.
Right on. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it for this week. I want to thank Rod for being a guest with us. I had just a great conversation. You can learn more about Omada at omada.net. That's omada.net. Please do go check out Rod's technology podcast too around SMR. It's called SMR Podcast, and you can find them at smrpodcast.com. I am a new subscriber, a new listener, and thoroughly enjoying the conversation. So keep bringing it, Rod. And for us, you can visit us on the web at identityattthecenter.com. You can follow us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. And with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityattthecenter.com.